The biting October wind howled through Aztec, New Mexico territory, as Georgia Nichols stumbled along the muddy Main Street clutching her shawl tightly around her swollen belly. The once friendly faces of townsfolk now turned away in disgust, whispers following her like shadows as she made her way to Thornton's general store. 6 months pregnant and completely alone, Georgia had nowhere left to turn. "We don't serve your kind here anymore, Miss Nichols," Mr. Thornton said coldly, blocking the entrance to his store. "Pastor Williams made it clear at Sunday's service. Unmarried women in your condition bring nothing but shame to our good Christian community." Georgia's cheeks burned with humiliation. "Please, Mr. Thornton, I need food. I have money." She held out the few remaining coins she'd saved from her teaching salary before the school board had dismissed her. "Take your business elsewhere. Perhaps try the next town over, though I doubt they'll be more welcoming to fallen women." Thornton's wife appeared behind him, nodding in solemn agreement. Tears stinging her eyes, Georgia turned away, painfully aware of the stares from passers-by. The year 1878 was proving unforgiving for a woman in her position. Just 8 months ago, she'd arrived in Aztec with hopes and dreams of building a respectable life as the town's schoolteacher. Now, at 22, she faced the harsh reality of frontier justice, swift and uncompromising. "Miss Nichols." The soft voice of Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly widow who lived at the edge of town, caught Georgia's attention. "Come by my place this evening. I can spare some preserves and bread." Georgia nodded gratefully, but the kindness only accentuated her isolation. Her tiny cabin half a mile outside town had become both sanctuary and prison. The father of her child, a smooth-talking salesman who had promised marriage before disappearing with her savings, was long gone. Her family back east had disowned her upon learning of her condition. The walk back to her cabin felt longer than usual, each step a reminder of how quickly fortunes could change. Georgia had almost reached the path leading to her home when Sheriff Mason's voice rang out. "Miss Nichols, a word, please." She turned, dread pooling in her stomach. "Yes, Sheriff." The lawman adjusted his hat uncomfortably. "There's been a town meeting. The council has. Well, they've decided you need to vacate your property by month's end." "What? They can't do that. I own that land. I paid for it with my own money." "Well, there's some question about the deed's validity now. Mayor Simmons claims there were irregularities in the paperwork." The sheriff couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Georgia. There's nothing I can do." "This is wrong and you know it," Georgia said, her voice breaking. "Where am I supposed to go? Winter's coming." Sheriff Mason simply shook his head. "You've got 3 weeks. I suggest you start making arrangements." Georgia watched him walk away, her future dissolving before her eyes. She placed a protective hand over her belly. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "But I promise I'll find a way." That night, as Georgia sat by her meager fire counting her remaining coins, she heard the distant thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Visitors were rare, especially after dark. She reached for the small revolver she kept by the door, another relic of her shattered trust. A firm knock rattled the cabin door. "Hello? Anyone home?" The deep voice was unfamiliar. Georgia approached cautiously. "Who's there?" "Name's Wade Jackson. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back." "I saw your light." Georgia hesitated. "I'm not in a position to help strangers, Mr. Jackson. Just need some water and directions to the nearest town. I'm willing to pay." The mention of payment made Georgia reconsider. With trembling hands, she unbolted the door and opened it a crack, revolver hidden in the folds of her dress. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Trail dust covered his denim pants and leather vest, and a well-worn gun belt rested on his hips. But it was his eyes that caught Georgia's attention, startlingly blue and direct, assessing her just as carefully as she studied him. "You're alone out here?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her pregnant belly before quickly returning to her face. "I can take care of myself," Georgia replied defensively. Wade Jackson nodded slowly. "Never suggested otherwise, madam. Town nearby." "Aztec is about 3 miles that way," Georgia pointed. "But if you're looking for a warm welcome, you might be disappointed. They're selective about who they help." Something in her tone made the stranger study her more carefully. "I see. Would that selectivity have anything to do with your current situation?" Georgia stiffened. "My situation is none of your concern, Mr. Jackson." "Fair enough." He nodded toward her water pump. "May I?" Georgia stepped back, allowing him to fill his canteen. As he worked the pump handle, she noticed the lean strength in his movements and the way he favored his left leg slightly. A long scar ran from his temple down his cheek, partially hidden by several days' worth of stubble. "You're not from around here," she observed. "Been riding from Colorado. Headed to Santa Fe eventually." He glanced at her cabin. "You live here alone?" "Yes." "That's not safe." "Neither is being surrounded by people who wish you gone," Georgia replied bitterly. Wade capped his canteen and reached into his pocket, extracting a silver dollar which he extended toward her. "For your trouble." Georgia shook her head. "Keep it. Water's free." "Nothing's free in this world, madam." His eyes held hers. "Especially kindness." Before she could respond, a sharp pain gripped Georgia's abdomen. She gasped, clutching the doorframe for support. The stranger moved with surprising speed, stepping forward to steady her. "Madam, you all right?" Georgia breathed through the pain. "It's nothing. The baby's just restless tonight." Wade Jackson seemed to make a decision. "I should go, but I don't feel right leaving a woman alone in your condition. Mind if I make camp nearby? I'll be gone by morning." Georgia wanted to refuse. Trusting men had led to her current predicament, but practicality won out. Having someone nearby, even a stranger, might deter any townsfolk with unfriendly intentions. "There's a clearing just past those trees. You can water your horse at the creek." Wade tipped his hat. "Much obliged, miss." "Nichols, Georgia Nichols." "Rest well, Miss Nichols. You'll hardly know I'm there." As he disappeared into the darkness, Georgia closed and bolted her door, wondering if she'd just made another mistake. But something about Wade Jackson's straightforward manner had seemed trustworthy, or perhaps she was simply too desperate for any kindness, even from a passing stranger. Morning came with unusual sounds, the chopping of wood and the smell of coffee brewing. Georgia wrapped herself in her shawl and cautiously opened her door to find Wade Jackson stacking firewood beside her cabin. "Morning," he said simply. "Hope I didn't wake you. Coffee's ready if you'd like some." Georgia eyed the substantial woodpile. "I thought you were leaving at dawn." "Changed my mind." He poured coffee into a tin cup and offered it to her. "Your woodpile was getting low. Winter's coming early this year." "Mr. Jackson, I appreciate the gesture, but just Wade is fine." "Wade, then. I don't need charity." His expression remained impassive. "Not offering any. I'm a man who pays his debts. You provided water when I needed it." "A cup of water hardly merits a cord of firewood." Wade shrugged. "I'm a generous man." He glanced toward Aztec. "I'll be heading into town shortly. Need anything while I'm there?" Georgia hesitated. "Mrs. Abernathy's supplies wouldn't last long, but she couldn't afford pride. "If you wouldn't mind. I need flour, sugar, and some salt pork. I can pay you." He nodded. "Consider it done." As he saddled his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, Georgia called out, "You should know that mentioning my name might not be well received in town." Wade paused. "Any particular reason?" Georgia gestured to her belly. "Unmarried women in my condition aren't welcome in polite society." His expression hardened slightly. I see. The people of Aztec are God-fearing folks who believe in propriety above all else. Wade mounted his horse with fluid grace. I've found that those who talk most about God's laws often forget about his mercy. He tipped his hat. Don't worry, Miss Nichols. I know how to handle small-town righteousness. Georgia watched him ride away, wondering what had brought this enigmatic man to her doorstep. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Wade Jackson rode into Aztec with practiced vigilance. 15 years of drifting through frontier towns had taught him to read the subtle signs of a community's character, and this one immediately set his teeth on edge. The main street was well maintained, the buildings freshly painted, but the stairs that followed him carried that particular blend of suspicion and judgment he'd encountered in towns where appearances mattered more than substance. He dismounted outside the general store, taking note of the church service's Sunday sign prominently displayed in the window. Inside, conversation halted as he entered. The proprietor, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, approached with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Thornton's." "Just passing through, for now," Wade replied, handing over George's list. "Need these items." Thornton scanned the paper. "Quite a substantial order for a traveler. I believe in being prepared." As Thornton gathered the supplies, Wade wandered the store, aware of the whispers behind him. The bell above the door jingled, and a portly man in an expensive suit entered, followed by a younger man with a sheriff's badge. "Mr. Jackson, I presume?" The portly man extended his hand. "Mayor Hiram Simmons. Sheriff Mason here mentioned a stranger had arrived." Wade shook the offered hand briefly. "Word travels fast. Small towns thrive on information." Simmons smiled without warmth. "What brings you to Aztec?" "Just passing through. Headed to Santa Fe." The mayor nodded. "We always welcome respectable travelers. You've found accommodations." "Made camp outside town." Sheriff Mason stepped forward. "Whereabouts exactly?" Wade met the lawman's gaze steadily. "Near the creek, east of town." "Near the Nichols woman's place," Thornton interjected, pausing in his task of measuring flour. An expectant silence fell over the store. Wade kept his expression neutral, recognizing the test being administered. "If you're referring to Miss Georgia Nichols, then yes, I watered my horse at her creek last night. Seems like a respectable lady." Mayor Simmons cleared his throat. "Mr. Jackson, as newcomers often are unaware of local situations, I feel obligated to inform you that Miss Nichols has placed herself outside the moral boundaries of our community." "Has she broken any laws?" Wade asked calmly. "Not legal ones perhaps, but moral. Then her standing is between her and her maker." Wade turned back to Thornton. "Are my supplies ready?" The shopkeeper hesitated, looking toward the mayor, who gave a slight nod. "That'll be $3.45, Thornton said stiffly. Wade paid, adding an extra $1. "Also need a sack of oats for my horse." As Thornton fetched the oats, Sheriff Mason stepped closer. "Word of advice, Jackson. We're peaceful folks here, but we protect our own. The Nichols woman isn't welcome, and those who associate with her might find themselves similarly regarded." Wade secured his purchases. "Appreciate the clarity, Sheriff. Always good to know where a man stands." Outside the store, Wade loaded his supplies onto his horse when a weathered elderly woman approached. "Pardon me, sir," she said softly. "I'm Mrs. Abernathy. Might I have a word?" Wade nodded. "Those supplies are for Georgia, aren't they?" When Wade remained silent, she continued. "I'm one of the few who still speak to her. The town's treatment of that girl is shameful." "Why haven't more stood up for her?" Mrs. Abernathy sighed. "Fear. Mayor Simmons holds the mortgage on half the businesses in town, and Pastor Williams convinces the rest that moral contamination spreads like disease." She glanced around nervously. Georgia's a good girl who trusted the wrong man. Her only sin was believing in love. What happened to the father? Handsome fellow named Edward Prescott. Sold miracle tonics and empty promises. Left town with Georgia's savings when she told him about the baby. Wade's jaw tightened. And the town blames her. Of course. It's always the woman's shame to bear. Mrs. Abernathy touched his arm. They're trying to run her off her land. If you're helping her, be careful. Mayor Simmons doesn't like losing. Wade tipped his hat to her. Madam, I've met men like your mayor in towns across the territory. They're all the same big in their small ponds until someone drains the water. Mrs. Abernathy smiled faintly. You planning on doing some draining, Mr. Jackson? Just delivering groceries, madam. For now. Wade rode out of Aztec deep in thought. He hadn't planned on stopping long in this town. His business in Santa Fe was pressing, but something about Georgia Nichols's situation stirred memories he'd long suppressed. He recognized the look in her eyes, the desperate courage of someone fighting a battle they couldn't possibly win alone. He'd seen that same look in his sister's eyes years ago, before consumption took her, abandoned by the man who'd promised to love her, shunned by the community that should have protected her. Wade had been too young then to help, barely 16 when Rebecca died, her newborn son with her. Georgia was waiting anxiously when he returned, relief washing over her face at the sight of the supplies. You got everything, she marveled, helping unpack. How much do I owe you? Considerate payment for camping on your land. Wade, I insist. Georgia's chin lifted stubbornly. I won't accept charity, not from you, not from anyone. Wade recognized the pride that came from having nothing left but dignity. Then hire me. Excuse me. Your roof needs patching. Wood needs chopping. Winter's coming and you're in no condition to handle it all. I need somewhere to stay for a few days. Seems like a fair exchange. Georgia studied him suspiciously. Why would you want to help me? Maybe I just don't like bullies. Wade set down a bag of sugar. I met your mayor and his pet sheriff in town. Got the distinct impression they're making your life difficult. That's putting it mildly. Georgia's hand moved protectively over her belly. They're trying to take my land, claim there were irregularities with the deed. Were there? No, I paid fair and square. Mayor Simmons just didn't like that I bought it instead of the cattle rancher who's been wanting to expand. Wade considered this. May I see the deed? Georgia disappeared into the cabin, returning with a legal document which she handed to Wade. He studied it carefully, noting the official seals and signatures. This looks legitimate to me. Did you register it with the Territorial Land Office in Santa Fe? Yes, but Mayor Simmons claims the seller wasn't authorized to divide the original property. It's all lies, but without money for a lawyer. George's voice faltered. Wade refolded the deed. I'm headed to Santa Fe anyway. I could have someone look into it. Hope flickered in George's eyes before caution reasserted itself. Why would you do that for a woman you just met? Wade hesitated, rarely one to share personal history. Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. He changed the subject. So, do we have a deal? Room and board in exchange for repairs. George's practical nature warred with suspicion. Where were you headed before this? Santa Fe. I have business there, but it can wait a week or so. What kind of business? Wade smiled slightly. The legal kind, if that's what you're asking. I occasionally do tracking work for the Territorial Marshal's office. Find people who don't want to be found. A bounty hunter. I prefer a retrieval specialist. Georgia considered him. Something in her circumstances had made her wary, but desperation was a powerful motivator. 1 week. You can stay in the lean-to behind the cabin. And we share meals. I won't have you working without proper food. Wade nodded. Deal. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Georgia shook it. Her hand felt small and warm in his, and their eyes met with a flash of understanding that transcended words. For the first time in months, Georgia didn't feel entirely alone, and Wade remembered what it was like to have a purpose beyond his next job. "First things first," he said, breaking the moment. "Let's fix that roof before the next rain." Over the following days, a cautious routine developed. Wade rose early, tended to his horse, and worked on repairs while Georgia cooked and kept house. They shared meals at her small table, conversation gradually becoming less stilted. Wade learned that Georgia had come from Philadelphia, where she'd trained as a teacher, before seeking independence in the West. Georgia discovered that Wade had fought for the Union in the war despite being from Missouri, and had been drifting ever since. "Don't you ever get tired of moving?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Wade poked at the embers. "Used to dream of settling somewhere, building something permanent." "What changed?" "Realized some men aren't meant for roots." Georgia studied his profile in the firelight. "I don't believe that." "Everyone needs somewhere to belong," says the woman being driven from her home. She smiled sadly. "At least I tried. That's worth something." Wade felt something shift inside him at her words, admiration for her resilience, and something else he wasn't ready to name. On the fourth day, Wade was repairing a fence when he spotted 3 riders approaching. He recognized Sheriff Mason, accompanied by 2 men he hadn't met. "Afternoon, Jackson," Mason called. "Staying longer than expected, I see." Wade set down his tools. "Miss Nichols hired me for some repairs." "Did she now?" One of the men, middle-aged with the weathered look of a rancher, spoke up. "Interesting that a woman in her desperate circumstances can afford help." "And you are Frank Underwood. I own the Circle U ranch bordering this property." His eyes narrowed. "Property that rightfully should be part of my range." Wade positioned himself between the riders and the cabin. "If you have business with Miss Nichols, state it properly." Sheriff Mason dismounted. "We're here on official business, Jackson." "Got papers from the territorial judge questioning the validity of Miss Nichols's deed." He pulled an envelope from his vest. "She's got 2 weeks to vacate or present evidence countering our claim." Wade's voice remained level. "Mind if I see those papers? They're not for you." "I'm working for Miss Nichols. Consider me her representative." Reluctantly, Mason handed over the documents. Wade scanned them carefully, noting several irregularities. "This isn't a court order," he observed. "It's a petition for review. There's no requirement for her to vacate until a judge rules." Mason's face reddened. "Mayor Simmons says—" "Your mayor isn't a judge," Wade interrupted, returning the papers. "Miss Nichols stays until a proper hearing determines otherwise." Underwood spat. "Listen, stranger, this doesn't concern you. That woman's nothing but trouble, flaunting her shame, corrupting decent folk." Wade's hand moved casually to rest on his gun belt. "I suggest you remember you're talking about a lady." "Lady?" Underwood laughed harshly. The cabin door opened and Georgia appeared, her face pale but composed. "Gentlemen, I see you've brought more paperwork to intimidate me." Sheriff Mason had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Just doing my job, Georgia. Your job is upholding the law, not helping thieves steal my land." She nodded toward the papers. "I'll have proper representation when the time comes," Underwood sneered. "No lawyer in the territory will take your case, girl." Wade stepped forward. "She'll have representation. Count on it." A tense silence followed, broken when Sheriff Mason mounted his horse. 2 weeks, Georgia, then we'll have to take action." After they rode away, Georgia's composure crumbled. She sat heavily on a nearby stump, hands trembling. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Not until they drive me away." Wade crouched beside her. "Those papers are mostly bluster." They're hoping to scare you into leaving without a fight. It's working. Georgia looked at him with tear-filled eyes. I'm terrified, Wade. Where would I go? Who would hire a pregnant, unmarried woman? You're not leaving, Wade said firmly. We'll fight this. He nodded. I'll ride to Santa Fe tomorrow. I know a lawyer there, Nathan Reynolds. Decent man, owes me a favor. I'll get him to look at your deed. Georgia shook her head. You've already done too much. This isn't your battle. Maybe I'm making it mine. Their eyes met, and Wade saw something in Georgia's expression shift, a flicker of hope, yes, but also confusion and the beginning of something deeper that both attracted and frightened him. Why? She asked simply. Wade stood, uncomfortable with the question. Get some rest. I'll leave at first light tomorrow. That evening, their conversation over dinner was subdued. Wade described the route to Santa Fe and promised to return within a week. Georgia tried to maintain her practical demeanor, but the prospect of being alone again weighed heavily on her. If I'm not back in 7 days, go to Mrs. Abernathy's, Wade instructed. Don't stay here alone if those men return. Georgia nodded, then reached across the table to touch his hand. Thank you, Wade. Whatever your reasons, thank you. That night, Wade lay awake in the lean-to, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, moving whenever connections threatened to form. Yet here he was, involving himself in a desperate woman's fight against an entire town. The smart play would be to ride out now, continue to Santa Fe as planned, and forget Aztec and Georgia Nichols. But when morning came, Wade found himself explaining to Georgia how to use his spare revolver in his absence. Aim for the center of the body, not the head, and don't hesitate. Georgia handled the weapon with surprising competence. My father taught me to shoot before I left Philadelphia. I'm not helpless. Never thought you were. Wade finished saddling his horse. Just be careful. Men like Underwood are dangerous when they don't get their way. I've survived this long. Georgia handed him a package wrapped in cloth, cornbread and jerky for the journey. The simple kindness touched Wade more than he expected. I'll be back before you know it. On impulse, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. Georgia looked up at him with eyes that held too much hope for his comfort. I'm counting on it, she said softly. The ride to Santa Fe took Wade 3 days of hard traveling. The territorial capital bustled with activity, a sharp contrast to Aztec's subdued Main Street. Wade headed directly to the law offices of Reynolds and Blackwell, where Nathan Reynolds greeted him with surprise. Wade Jackson, never thought I'd see you voluntarily enter a lawyer's office. Reynolds, a slender man with spectacles and prematurely graying hair, grinned. Who are you hunting now? Not hunting anyone. Need legal advice. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. You in trouble? Not me. Wade explained George's situation, showing him the deed and the papers Sheriff Mason had delivered. Reynolds studied the documents carefully. This deed appears legitimate. The petition is mostly legal intimidation. He frowned. Though there is a clause about original property division that could be problematic, I'd need to check the territorial land records. How long would that take? A day, perhaps 2. Reynolds regarded Wade curiously. This woman must be special for you to ride all this way on her behalf. Wade ignored the implication. She's being wronged, that's enough. For Wade Jackson, the man who minds his own business, that's a change. Reynolds smiled knowingly. I'll help, but I need the complete story. What's really happening in Aztec? Wade sighed. Small-minded people using moral judgment as a weapon. The woman's pregnant, unmarried. Towns using that as justification to run her off land that a local rancher wants. Reynolds nodded slowly. Ah, now it makes sense. This is about Rebecca. Wade stiffened. This has nothing to do with my sister, doesn't it? Reynolds set down the papers. 15 years of drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to care. Now suddenly you're championing a pregnant woman being persecuted by her community. The parallel seems obvious. Are you going to help or not? Wade asked tersely. Reynolds adjusted his spectacles. Of course I'll help. Come back tomorrow afternoon, I'll have answers then. Wade spent the night at a cheap hotel, his sleep disturbed by dreams of the past Rebecca's pale face as consumption ravaged her, their parents' refusal to acknowledge her sinful condition, the preacher who denied her proper burial in the church cemetery. He woke before dawn, unsettled by memories he'd spent years suppressing. Reynolds had good news when Wade returned to his office. The deed is legitimate. The mayor's petition has no legal basis. He handed Wade a document bearing an official seal. This is certification from the Territorial Land Office confirming Miss Nichols's ownership. No judge will rule against it. Wade took the paper with relief. What do I owe you? Consider that old favor repaid. Reynolds hesitated. Wade, I've also written a letter to Judge Hammond. He'll be in Las Vegas next month for circuit court. If your Miss Nichols faces further harassment, take her there. Hammond despises property bullies. She's not my Miss Nichols. Reynolds smiled slightly. If you say so. His expression grew serious. But Wade, I know you. Don't make this about Rebecca. That wound never healed because you never let it. Wade tucked the documents into his saddlebags. I appreciate the legal help. I'll leave the personal advice. Just be careful. Helping this woman is honorable, but ask yourself why you're really doing it. The question followed Wade all the way back to Aztec, through dusty trails and across the high desert. By the time he approached George's cabin on the 6th day, he still had no clear answer, or perhaps none he was willing to acknowledge. The cabin appeared deserted when he arrived. No smoke from the chimney, no movement inside. Alarm shot through him until he noticed fresh tracks leading toward the creek. Following them, he found Georgia washing clothes, her back to him. Should you be doing that in your condition? He called. Georgia whirled around, joy lighting her face. Wade, you're back. She abandoned her washing and hurried toward him, stopping just short of embracing him. Did you find the lawyer? Wade dismounted. Better than that. I got certification from the land office. He produced the document. Your property is legally yours. No judge will rule otherwise. Georgia took the paper with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes as she read. I can stay. You can stay. The relief overwhelmed her. Without warning, Georgia stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Wade's waist, her face pressed against his chest. The unexpected contact froze him momentarily before his arms slowly encircled her shoulders. Thank you, she whispered against his shirt. I was beginning to think I had nowhere left in this world. Wade found himself stroking her hair, acutely aware of her warmth against him. Everyone deserves somewhere to belong. The moment stretched between them, comfortable and dangerous all at once. Finally, Georgia pulled back, wiping her tears with embarrassment. I must look a fright, she said, attempting to smooth her hair. You look fine, Wade replied, the understatement of the year. Even with her worn dress and work-reddened hands, Georgia Nichols possessed a quiet beauty that had begun to haunt his thoughts on the lonely ride to Santa Fe. I've made stew, Georgia said, gathering her washing. You must be hungry after your journey. They walked back to the cabin together, Georgia recounting the events of his absence. Sheriff Mason had visited once, alone, seemingly more to check on her welfare than to intimidate. Mrs. Abernathy had brought more preserves and news that Pastor Williams had dedicated an entire sermon to the moral decay threatening their community. The whole town knows you're helping me, Georgia said as they reached the cabin. It's caused quite a stir, Mrs. Abernathy says half the women are scandalized and the other half secretly envious. Wade took the washing basket from her. People always need something to talk about. Apparently Mayor Simmons is particularly upset. He expected me to be gone by now. He'll be more upset when he sees the land office certification. Inside, the cabin seemed different, somehow warmer, more welcoming. Wade noticed Georgia had repaired the chair he'd been working on and added curtains made from flour sacks to the windows. "Place looks nice," he observed. Georgia smiled, pleased by the compliment. Amazing what hope can do. Over dinner, Wade described his journey and the legal advice Reynolds had provided. Georgia listened attentively, her relief gradually giving way to determination. "So what happens now?" she asked. "They'll still try to make life difficult. Now we show them you're not leaving." Wade leaned back in his chair. "Starting with returning to town properly. No more skulking around or having others fetch supplies." Georgia's hand instinctively went to her belly. "I can't face them all. The stares, the whispers. You can't hide forever either." Wade's voice softened. "Georgia, you've done nothing wrong. Your child deserves a mother who walks with her head high. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're judging." "No, but I know something about living under others' condemnation." Wade hesitated, then continued. "My sister Rebecca found herself in a similar situation when I was 16. The man disappeared, the town turned against her, our parents forced her to leave." His voice grew rough. "She died alone, trying to reach an aunt who might have taken her in." Georgia reached across the table to touch his hand. "I'm so sorry, Wade. I was too young to help her then, but I'm not young anymore, and I won't stand by watching history repeat itself." "Is that why you're helping me?" "Because of your sister." The question echoed Reynolds's words too closely. Wade stood abruptly. "It's getting late. We should both get some rest." Georgia looked hurt by his sudden withdrawal but nodded. "Of course. Good night, Wade." Later, lying in the lean-to, Wade confronted the uncomfortable truth. Yes, Rebecca's memory had initially drawn him to Georgia's plight, but something else kept him here now, something he hadn't felt in years, if ever. Georgia Nichols, with her quiet dignity and stubborn resilience, had begun to matter to him in ways that went beyond obligation or redressing old wounds. The realization was terrifying. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability inevitably led to pain. Wade had built his life around avoiding both. Mourning brought clearer heads and practical decisions. Wade showed Georgia the certification from the land office and explained how they would proceed. "First, we file this with the county clerk in Farmington," he explained. "Then we visit Mayor Simmons and inform him his petition has been denied." Georgia looked nervous but resolute. "When?" "Today. No time like the present." They rode into Aztec together, Wade on his chestnut gelding and Georgia on her aging mare. The town seemed to freeze as they proceeded down the main street, conversations halting mid-sentence. Activities suspended as residents stared in disbelief at Georgia Nichols, riding openly through town, with the mysterious stranger at her side. Their first stop was Thornton's general store. Wade dismounted and helped Georgia down, offering his arm as they entered the establishment. The customers inside fell silent, watching wide-eyed as Georgia approached the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton," she said clearly. "I need flour, sugar, coffee, and 3 yards of that blue calico, please." Thornton glanced nervously toward the other customers. "Miss Nichols, I'm not sure, is there a problem with my money?" Georgia placed coins on the counter. Wade stood beside her, his presence a silent but unmistakable statement. Thornton swallowed visibly before reaching for the flour. "No problem at all, Miss Nichols. I'll get your order ready." While Thornton gathered the supplies, Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, approached, her voice pitched for maximum audience effect. Really, Georgia, haven't you caused enough scandal, parading your condition through town and now with him? She glanced dismissively at Wade. Georgia straightened her shoulders. Mrs. Peterson, I'm simply purchasing necessities same as you. As for my companion, Mr. Jackson has been kind enough to help with repairs to my property. Your property? Mayor Simmons's voice boomed from the doorway. I believe that matter is under legal dispute. Wade turned. Not anymore. He produced the land office certification. Miss Nichols's ownership has been officially confirmed by the Territorial Land Office. Your petition has no standing. Simmons's face darkened as he snatched the document. This changes nothing. There are other considerations beyond mere legality. Such as, Wade's voice was dangerously quiet, moral fitness, community standards. This town has the right to determine who belongs. Interesting perspective, Mayor. Wade stepped closer. Tell me, does that same standard apply to everyone? The men who visit Madame Lewis's establishment outside town, for instance, or the folks who gamble in the back room of the Silverbuck Saloon, or perhaps those who water down their whiskey and sell it as full proof. Mayor Simmons paled. Are you threatening me? Just wondering about those community standards. Seems they might be selectively applied. Georgia touched Wade's arm. Our supplies are ready. Wade nodded, never breaking eye contact with Simmons. Miss Nichols will be remaining on her property, Mayor. Any further attempts to dislodge her will be met with legal action, and perhaps some inconvenient revelations about Aztec's moral standards. Turning his back on the sputtering mayor, Wade helped Georgia gather her purchases and escorted her outside, where a small crowd had gathered, drawn by rumors of their presence. Among them stood Pastor Williams, his clerical collar gleaming white against his black coat. Miss Nichols, he called. A word, please. Georgia tensed but faced him squarely. Yes, Pastor, I see you've chosen to flaunt your condition and your association with this stranger. The preacher's voice carried for the benefit of his audience. The church cannot condone such behavior. Wade stepped forward. Interesting position for a man of God. I seem to recall Christ showed particular kindness to women society had condemned. Pastor Williams's face reddened. Do not presume to lecture me on Scripture, sir. Not lecturing. Just observing that judgment comes more readily than mercy in your congregation. This woman has sinned brazenly. And where's the man who shares responsibility for her condition? Wade interrupted, his voice rising. Where's your righteous condemnation for him? Or does your moral outrage only extend to those unable to defend themselves? A murmur ran through the crowd. Georgia placed a restraining hand on Wade's arm. Wade, please, let's go. But Wade wasn't finished. He addressed the gathering directly. This is Georgia Nichols. She was your schoolteacher. She bought property legally. She's expecting a child. That's all you know, yet you've judged her unworthy of basic decency. His eyes swept the crowd. Miss Nichols isn't leaving Aztec. She belongs here as much as any of you. And how you treat her says more about your character than hers. Sheriff Mason pushed through the crowd. That's enough, Jackson. You're causing a disturbance. No, Sheriff. Mrs. Abernathy's voice rang out unexpectedly. The elderly woman moved to stand beside Georgia. He's speaking truth, and it's long overdue. Another voice joined in Mr. Fletcher, the blacksmith. The man's right. We've been unkind, and that ain't Christian. Georgia was good to my children, added Mrs. Cooper hesitantly. Best teacher we ever had. Pastor Williams raised his hands. This woman has violated the moral standards, not my way. Wade cut in sharply, his voice carrying across the street. That's not my way, and it shouldn't be yours. Judging a woman while the man responsible walks free isn't justice or Christianity. It's just cruelty disguised as righteousness." A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Wade turned to Georgia, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. "We're finished here," he said quietly. As they mounted their horses, Georgia whispered, "Thank you for defending me, but this won't change anything." Wade wasn't so sure. He'd seen something shift in the faces of the townspeople, doubt where certainty had reigned, discomfort where righteousness had been secure. It wasn't revolution, but it was a beginning. That night, as they sat before the fire in George's cabin, Wade recounted a conversation he'd overheard while loading their supplies. Mrs. Cooper was asking Mrs. Abernathy if you might be willing to tutor her children privately. He smiled slightly. And Fletcher mentioned he might need some fence work done on his south pasture. Georgia looked skeptical. One speech doesn't change years of social conditioning. No, but it might make a few people question it. Wade poked at the fire. Cracks in a dam always start small. Georgia studied him across the flames. "You're a surprising man, Wade Jackson." "How so?" "Most men I've known seek acceptance, not confrontation. They conform rather than challenge." Wade shrugged. "I've spent too many years watching injustice to stay silent now." "Is that why you never settled anywhere?" "Too many battles to fight." The question hit closer to truth than Wade found comfortable. "Maybe I just never found anywhere worth staying." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a question neither was ready to ask, a possibility neither dared acknowledge. The following days brought subtle changes. Mrs. Cooper indeed sent her eldest son with a note asking if Georgia would consider tutoring her children 3 afternoons a week. Mr. Fletcher appeared with an offer of fence work for Wade, with payment in both cash and meat from a recently butchered steer. Even Thornton sent word that Georgia's business would be welcome in his store during regular hours. Not everyone's attitudes changed, of course. Mayor Simmons and Pastor Williams maintained their disapproval, and many townsfolk still averted their eyes when they encountered Georgia. But the complete ostracism had cracked, allowing small kindnesses to seep through. Wade continued making improvements to Georgia's cabin, building shelves, repairing the roof properly, and constructing a sturdy cradle for the coming baby. Each completed project should have been a step toward his departure, yet he found himself creating new tasks, inventing reasons to stay another day, another week. Georgia never asked when he planned to leave, but the question hung between them, especially in the quiet evenings by the fire. They developed a comfortable routine, she cooking and keeping house, he handling repairs and heavier work. It felt domestic, natural, and increasingly precious to them both. One evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the mountains, Georgia winced and placed a hand on her belly. "Are you all right?" Wade asked, instantly alert. Georgia smiled reassuringly. "Just the baby kicking." "Would you like to feel?" The offer startled Wade. Such intimacy crossed boundaries he'd carefully maintained. Yet he found himself nodding, moving to sit beside her on the bench. Georgia took his hand and placed it gently on the swell of her belly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he felt it, a definite push against his palm, the unmistakable movement of new life. "That's incredible," he whispered. "Frightening too," Georgia admitted. "In a few weeks, this child will be here, depending on me for everything." Her voice faltered. "Sometimes I wonder if I can do it alone." Wade's hand remained on her belly, feeling another kick. "You won't be alone." The words escaped before he could consider their implications. Georgia's eyes widened, searching his face. "What do you mean?" Wade withdrew his hand, suddenly conscious of crossing into territory he'd avoided for years. "I mean you have supporters now. Mrs. Abernathy, the Coopers, others." Disappointment flickered across George's features. "Of course." "I'm grateful for that." An awkward silence fell between them. Wade stood, moving back to his chair across the fire. I should check on my horse before turning in. Outside in the cold night air, Wade confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with Georgia Nichols, perhaps had already fallen. The realization terrified him. Love meant permanence, vulnerability, the risk of devastating loss. Everything he'd spent 15 years running from. Yet the thought of riding away, of never seeing Georgia again, created a hollow ache in his chest he couldn't ignore. She deserved better than a drifter with a troubled past and uncertain future. Her child deserved a father who could offer stability, not a man whose life had been defined by transience. Wade spent a restless night weighing possibilities he'd never considered before. By morning, he'd reached no conclusion except that he couldn't leave not yet, not without knowing Georgia would truly be secure. His opportunity to prove that commitment came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Wade was chopping wood when the sound of approaching horses drew his attention. Sheriff Mason and 2 deputies rode up, their expressions grim. "Jackson," Mason called. "Need a word." Wade set down his axe. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Mason dismounted. "Got some information you might find interesting. Man named Edward Prescott was arrested in Durango last week, charged with fraud and theft." The name hit Wade like a physical blow. Prescott, the man who had abandoned Georgia. Colorado authorities found papers on him, Mason continued. Letters from various women, including one from Georgia Nichols. Wade's jaw tightened. And Prescott's being transferred to the territorial prison in Santa Fe. He'll pass through here tomorrow. Mason studied Wade carefully. "Thought you might want to know, given your interest in Miss Nichols's situation." "Does she know?" "Not yet. Figured you might want to tell her yourself." Wade nodded slowly. "Appreciate the information, Sheriff. Curious, though why bring it to me?" Mason adjusted his hat. "Let's just say your speech in town made some of us reconsider our positions. What happened to Miss Nichols wasn't right. Maybe this gives her some closure." After the sheriff departed, Wade struggled with how to share this news with Georgia. The return of Prescott, even as a prisoner, would resurrect painful memories. Yet she deserved to know. He found her hanging laundry, her face serene in the afternoon sunlight. The sight made his chest tighten with emotion he couldn't fully name. "Georgia." Something in his tone made her turn, alert to trouble. "Sheriff Mason just left. They've arrested Edward Prescott in Colorado. He'll be passing through Aztec tomorrow on his way to prison." Georgia's face drained of color. She reached for the clothesline to steady herself. "Edward." Here, Wade moved quickly to support her. "Just briefly while they change horses. He's under guard. You don't have to see him." "What was he arrested for?" "Fraud." "Apparently you weren't the only woman he deceived." Georgia laughed bitterly. "That shouldn't surprise me, should it?" She pressed a hand to her belly. Did he ask about me?" Mason didn't say. Wade guided her to a bench. "Georgia, you don't owe that man anything, not your time, not your thoughts." "He's the father of my child," she said quietly. "Biology doesn't make a father." Georgia looked up at him, her eyes troubled. "What should I do, Wade? Part of me wants to face him, to show him I survived his betrayal. Another part never wants to see him again." Wade chose his words carefully. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. If you want to see him, I'll be right beside you. If you don't, that's your right too." Georgia's hand found his. "Would you really stand with me?" "Every step," he promised. That night, Georgia was unusually quiet. Wade gave her space, understanding she needed time to process the situation. Only as they prepared to retire did she speak her decision. "I want to see him," she said firmly. "Not for his sake, but for mine. I need to look him in the eye as an equal, not as the desperate, heartbroken woman he abandoned." Wade nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." The following day they rode into Aztec together. Word of Prescott's impending arrival had spread, drawing curious onlookers to the street outside the sheriff's office. Wade felt Georgia's tension as they dismounted. "You don't have to do this," he reminded her. Georgia squared her shoulders. "Yes, I do." Inside, Sheriff Mason greeted them awkwardly. "Miss Nichols, wasn't sure you'd come." "When will they arrive?" Georgia asked, her voice steady. "Any minute. They'll stop here for fresh horses before continuing to Santa Fe." Mason hesitated. "You should know, Prescott's not the same man who left here. Prison's ahead for him. Likely a long stretch," Georgia nodded. "I understand." The sound of horses and a wagon announced the arrival of the prison transport. Through the window, Wade saw 2 armed guards escorting a shackled prisoner from the wagon. Even at a distance, he could see this was a man broken by circumstances, shoulders slumped, once fine clothes now ragged. Sheriff Mason went outside to meet them. Words were exchanged, and Mason gestured toward the office. One guard led Prescott inside while the other remained with the wagon. Edward Prescott shuffled through the door, chains rattling with each step. His eyes focused on the floor, slowly lifted to take in his surroundings, then widened with shock at the sight of Georgia standing before him, her pregnancy unmistakable. "Georgia," his voice cracked. "I never thought—" "Hello, Edward," she said calmly. Prescott's gaze darted nervously to Wade, then back to Georgia. "Is this—" He gestured vaguely to her belly. "Your child?" "Yes," Georgia's voice remained steady. "The one you left behind when you stole my savings and disappeared." Prescott flinched. "I never meant—" He stopped, the lie apparent even to himself. "I'm sorry, for what it's worth." "It's worth very little now," Georgia replied. "But I didn't come for apologies. I came to show you that you didn't destroy me." Wade moved slightly closer to her, a silent statement of support. Prescott noticed the gesture, his eyes narrowing. "Found yourself a protector, I see," he said with a hint of his former arrogance. "I found someone who stands beside me, not above me," Georgia corrected. "Someone who sees worth beyond what he can take." The guard shifted impatiently. "Need to get moving. Prisoner exchange is complete," Georgia nodded. "I'm finished." She turned to leave, then paused. "Edward, our child will know nothing of you. That's my choice, and I make it without malice or regret. I wish you well in facing your consequences." With those words, she walked out, head high. Wade followed after, giving Prescott one long, measuring look, not threatening, simply acknowledging the gulf between them in values and character. Outside, Georgia took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. "It's done," she said quietly. Wade touched her shoulder gently. "You were magnificent." "I didn't feel magnificent. I felt sad for the man he could have been, sad for the future I once imagined." She looked up at Wade. "But mostly, I felt free." As they mounted their horses to return home, Georgia noticed the townspeople watching, not with judgment now, but with something closer to respect. Mrs. Cooper nodded in greeting. Mr. Fletcher tipped his hat. Even Pastor Williams, standing outside his church, gave a grudging acknowledgement. "Things really are changing," Georgia marveled. "People respect courage," Wade replied. "You've shown plenty of it." That evening, sitting before their fire, the weight of unspoken feelings grew too heavy to bear. Georgia broke the silence first. "What happens now, Wade? Winter's nearly here." "Your repairs are complete. The trouble with the deed is resolved." She hesitated. "You mentioned business in Santa Fe months ago." Wade stared into the flames. "That business is long finished." "Then what keeps you here?" The question demanded honesty Wade wasn't sure he could provide. Yet Georgia deserved nothing less. "You," he said simply. "You keep me here." Georgia's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Wade stood restlessly, moving to the window. I'm saying I care for you in ways I never expected, ways that terrify me if I'm honest. Why terrify? Because caring means risking loss. Because I've spent 15 years avoiding attachments, and now I can't imagine riding away from this cabin from you. He turned to face her. But what can I offer you, Georgia? A drifter with no home, no stability. Georgia rose, moving to stand before him. You've already offered me more than anyone else in this world: respect, support, friendship. You deserve more. Wade's voice roughened. You and your child deserve certainty. There's no certainty in this world, Wade, only choices. Georgia took his hand, placing it over her heart. This is my choice. You, here, now, if you'll stay. The simplicity of her declaration broke something inside Wade, the wall he'd built against vulnerability, against connection. He drew her gently into his arms. I'll stay, he whispered against her hair, for as long as you want me. Georgia looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What if I want forever? Wade's answer came not in words but in the gentle press of his lips against hers, a first kiss that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The weeks that followed brought profound changes. Wade moved from the lean-to into the cabin, sharing Georgia's life fully. Together, they prepared for winter and for the baby's arrival. Wade built, in addition to the cabin, a proper bedroom to replace the curtained alcove where Georgia had slept. Word spread through Aztec that Wade Jackson had permanently settled on Georgia Nichols's property. Opinions varied, but the outright hostility had largely dissipated. Mrs. Cooper expanded Georgia's tutoring responsibilities to include several neighbor children. Mr. Fletcher offered Wade steady work at his smithy, recognizing his skill with horses and metal. Mayor Simmons and a few others maintained their disapproval, but their influence had waned. The community had begun to judge for itself, gradually accepting that compassion served them better than condemnation. One snowy evening in mid-December, as they sat discussing names for the baby, Wade reached into his pocket and produced a small, worn velvet box. This belonged to my mother, he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. It's not much, but it's honest. Georgia Nichols, will you marry me? Georgia's eyes widened. Wade, are you sure? You don't have to do this out of obligation. Obligation has nothing to do with it. I love you. Have for months now. He took her hand. I want to be a father to your child, a husband to you, if you'll have me. Tears spilled down Georgia's cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll have you. They were married 3 days later in Mrs. Abernathy's parlor, with the elderly woman and Mr. Fletcher as witnesses. Judge Peterson, the banker's brother-in-law, surprisingly performed the ceremony, having ridden from Farmington at Mrs. Abernathy's request. Never thought I'd see the day, Mrs. Abernathy remarked afterward. Wade Jackson with a wedding ring. Half the unmarried women in the territory will be heartbroken. Wade laughed, his arm secure around Georgia's waist. Their loss is my considerable gain. 2 weeks later, Georgia went into labor during a fierce snowstorm. With the doctor unable to reach them, Wade and Mrs. Abernathy helped deliver a healthy baby boy, whom they named Samuel Thomas Jackson, Samuel for Georgia's father, Thomas for Wade's. As Wade held his son for the first time, the final pieces of his fractured life seemed to heal. This was what Rebecca had been denied: not just life, but family, community, belonging. In honoring Georgia and their child, Wade finally laid his sister's ghost to rest. Spring brought new beginnings. Wade and Mr. Fletcher established a partnership, expanding the blacksmith shop to include saddle repair and horse training. Georgia, recovered from childbirth, resumed teaching from their cabin, with baby Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. Gradually, Aztec adjusted to the new reality. Georgia and Wade were invited to community gatherings. Samuel was cooed over by the same women who had once shunned his mother. Even Pastor Williams, after much soul-searching, visited to bless the child. Mayor Simmons remained coolly civil, but his influence continued to diminish as the community evolved. The following year, Mr. Fletcher ran against him for mayor and won by a narrow margin, a victory he credited partly to Wade's support. On Samuel's first birthday, as friends gathered to celebrate, Georgia found Wade standing alone on their porch, gazing at the distant mountains. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, slipping her arm around his waist. Wade smiled down at her. "Just wondering what would have happened if my horse hadn't thrown that shoe last year. I believe some things are meant to be." Georgia rested her head against his shoulder. "You would have found your way here somehow. Perhaps." Wade pulled her closer. "Or perhaps we make our own destiny through the choices we face." "And the ones we make," Georgia added. "Like your choice to say 'not my way' when confronted with injustice." Wade nodded, remembering that day in town when he'd publicly challenged Aztec's treatment of Georgia. "Some stands are worth taking, no matter the cost. And some journeys are worth ending," Georgia said softly, "when you find where you belong." Inside, baby Samuel's laughter mingled with the voices of their friends Mrs. Abernathy, the Fletchers, the Coopers, and others who had crossed the bridge from judgment to acceptance. The sound represented everything Wade had never known. He wanted: community, family, roots. "I love you, Mrs. Jackson," he said, still marveling at how natural the words felt now. Georgia stretched up to kiss him. "And I love you, Mr. Jackson. Welcome home." As the years passed, the story of Wade and Georgia Jackson became part of Aztec's folklore: how a drifting cowboy had ridden to town and declared, "Not my way," when confronted with injustice. How love had transformed both their lives, and how a community had found its better nature through their example. Their family grew. A daughter joined them 2 years later, followed by twin boys. Wade's blacksmith business thrived, expanding to include a livery stable. Georgia eventually reopened the town school, teaching several generations of Aztec's children before retiring. The scandal that had once defined Georgia faded into distant memory, replaced by respect for a woman whose dignity had never wavered, and whose forgiveness had helped heal a divided community. The love she and Wade shared became a testament to second chances and the power of standing firm against injustice. And on quiet evenings, they would often sit together on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where Wade had once chopped wood as a temporary visitor, marveling at how a broken shoe and an act of kindness had changed the course of their lives forever.